The boy had both arms around her waist, and he was not letting go. That was the first thing William Ashford saw when he came down the stairs at 9:20 on a Thursday morning. His son Oliver, 8 years old and still in his school uniform, holding Frances Okafor with the full, wordless desperation of a child who has understood something the adults in the room have not yet said plainly, and who has decided that his body will say it for them. Frances stood at the front door with her coat on and her bag over her shoulder, and one hand resting gently on the back of Oliver's head. And she was not pulling away. She was not speaking. She was simply standing there, in the particular still way she stood in every room she occupied, waiting for whatever came next. Genevieve was in the entrance hall. She was dressed, as she always was by this hour, with complete composure, not a hair displaced, not a line of her expression admitting anything that had not been carefully decided in advance. She was holding a folder. William stopped on the third step from the bottom. He had come down because his mother had called up to him 20 minutes ago to say there was a matter requiring his attention before Frances left for the day. He had been on an early call with Tokyo, a call that had begun at 7 and had not released him until 9, and he had come down expecting a household administrative question, something about the service schedule or a contractor visit. The kind of thing Genevieve had been managing with quiet, thorough efficiency since she had moved in 14 months ago to help him in the weeks after Catherine died, and had not moved out of. William had built the Ashford Group over 22 years from a single commercial property acquisition into a development company with interests across 4 cities and 9 active projects. He was 47, which in his industry meant old enough to have survived 2 recessions and young enough to still run the company with his own hands, and he ran it with the focused intensity of a man who had always found the clean problem-solving of business easier than the other kind. Catherine had understood this about him, had loved him for it in the years when it was a strength, and worried about it in the years when she recognized it as also a form of distance. She had said so once plainly, in the way she said everything. He had said he would work on it. The working on it was still incomplete when she got sick, and once she was sick it became impossible, and then she was gone, and what had been a habit became the only thing standing between him and the full weight of what losing her meant. He had gone back to work 6 days after the funeral. He had structured his waking hours around the avoidance of the house during the hours when the house was most itself. His mother had arrived in the second week, and she had managed things, the meals, the school pickups, the staff schedules, Oliver's evenings, and he had accepted this the way he had accepted everything in those months, which was with a gratitude that did not look closely at what it was grateful for or at what, in accepting the arrangement, he had quietly surrendered. The house ran smoothly. He had not asked himself who was doing the running. He had not expected this. He looked at his son's face, which was pressed against Frances's side and was not visible to him. He looked at Frances, who met his eyes once, and then looked away, not evasively, but in the specific way of a person who has decided they are not going to make this harder than it already is. He looked at his mother, who was looking at him with the expression she had been wearing for 14 months when she needed him to make a decision, and wanted him to understand that she had already made it for him, and was simply waiting for his agreement. "What's happened?" he said. Genevieve opened the folder. She was precise about it. 2 hands, deliberate. A woman presenting evidence rather than making an accusation, because Genevieve had always understood that the most effective accusations were the ones that presented themselves as the reluctant conclusions of a reasonable person. She told him about the brooch. She told him clearly and with regret. She was always regretful, always reluctant, always pained to have to be the one to do this, and she told him about the photograph she had taken of it 7 days before it disappeared, and about the security log that confirmed Frances was the only person to have entered the master bedroom during the relevant window. She set the folder on the side table. Beside it, without any particular ceremony, she placed a printed copy of the security log. The entrance hall was very quiet except for the sound of Oliver, who had begun to cry. Not loudly. Oliver did almost nothing loudly. He cried the way he had done most things in the 14 months since his mother died, which was quietly and with great concentration, as though the act required his full attention. Francis's hand was still on the back of his head. William came down the remaining 3 steps. He stood in the hall, and he looked at the security log without touching it, and then he looked at Francis. He had employed her for 2 years. She had been referred by a domestic agency, had arrived on a Tuesday morning with good references and the particular quality of manner that he had recognized immediately and been grateful for, a quietness that was not meekness, a thoroughness that was not performance, an attentiveness to Oliver that had never once needed to be requested. In 2 years, he had thought of her. He recognized now with a clarity that arrived at inconvenient moments, primarily as a feature of the house's smooth functioning, the way he thought of the boiler and the alarm system and the garden maintenance. He had not thought about her the way Oliver was thinking about her. "Francis," he said, "can you explain the gap in the log? Where you were for 20 minutes on Tuesday afternoon?" She looked at him steadily. "I was with Oliver," she said. "He came home from school with a fever. He was in his room. I sat with him." "Why isn't that on the shift record?" "Because it wasn't on the shift record," she said simply. "It wasn't assigned. He was unwell, and I stayed with him." "That's not," Genevieve began. "I'm asking her," William said. He heard his own voice and recognized something in it. A flatness, a distance, the voice of a man performing fairness rather than feeling it, because feeling it would require him to be more present in this hallway than he currently knew how to be. He had been performing a great deal since Catherine died. He had not examined how much until this moment. "Is there anything else you can tell me?" he said to Frances. She looked at him for a long moment. She had a way of looking at people that he had noticed, but never examined. A direct, considered look that gave the impression she was deciding not just what to say, but what she was willing to give, and what she understood she was choosing to withhold. Then she looked at Oliver, still holding her, and something moved across her face that he could not name. "I know how it looks, Mr. Ashford," she said. Her voice was low and even. She was already facing the door, coat on, bag on her shoulder, her whole bearing that of a woman who has decided the direction she is going and is only delaying for as long as it takes to say what needs saying. "I have always known how it would look, if it came to this. But there is not a room in this house I have walked through that I did not walk through honestly." She paused. "I cannot prove that to you. I can only leave you with it." Genevieve put her hand on Oliver's shoulder. "Oliver." Her voice was gentle. It was always gentle. Genevieve's voice never rose, never cracked, never gave anything away that she had not decided to give. "Come away, sweetheart. Frances has to go now." Oliver's grip tightened. "She was paid to be kind to you," Genevieve said, and her voice was still gentle, and still quiet, and still the voice of a woman who believes she is saying something kind. It was her job. It wasn't real. The entrance hall went completely still, and Oliver lifted his head. He turned to look at his grandmother, and the look on his face was not a child's look of distress or confusion. It was something far more unsettling, the look of a child who has just heard something he knows to be wrong in the way he knows basic facts. The way he knows his own name and his own address and the date of his birthday, with a certainty that does not require argument, because it predates argument entirely. "It was real, Grandma," he said. His voice was the voice he used when he was very certain about something, a voice William had not heard in 14 months, a voice that belonged to the Oliver who existed before his mother died, the Oliver who stated facts with a completeness that left no space for dispute. "She cried when I told her about Dad's sight," Oliver said. "She cried, and she thought I was asleep." He turned to his father now, still holding Frances's hand, his face tilted up at the stairs with the simple directness of a child reporting information to the person who needs to have it. "She cried because her husband died on a site like that too, Daddy. She told me not to tell anyone." The words entered the hallway and stayed there. William Ashford's hands found the banister without him deciding to reach for it. He gripped it. He felt the polished wood under his palms, and he gripped it harder, and his legs made a decision that he had not made, and he sat down on the step. Not a controlled lowering, not a considered action, but the simple consequence of a man whose legs have received information that the rest of him has not yet processed, and have responded accordingly. He sat on the step, and he held the banister with both hands, and he could not speak. The site Oliver had mentioned was the Cresthaven development. William knew it by name, and by specific detail, he knew its location, its timeline, its contractor chain, because he had been involved in the early approvals before his property division had transferred the project to the Whitmore Group affiliate for completion. He knew there had been an incident in the latter stages. He had been told there had been a review. He had been told the review was complete. He had not asked what the review found, because by the time the incident occurred, he had been 4 months into Catherine's illness, 4 months into a different world entirely, one in which the only measurement that mattered was Catherine's, and he had trusted the people around him to handle what he could not attend to. He had trusted them the way a man trusts people when he has no capacity left for distrust. He had not known there was a name attached to the incident. He had not known the name was Okafor. He sat on the step and he thought about this, about what it meant that a woman had walked through his front door every morning for 2 years knowing what she knew. 2 years of mornings. 2 years of coming in through the same door, past the hall table, up to the floors she had been assigned, and doing the work with the care and thoroughness for which every reference she had ever received had specifically commended her. 2 years of sitting with his son in the evenings, when Oliver could not sleep. 2 years of finding, as she had apparently found, the particular way in at the particular moment that each question needed answering, not because she had been instructed to, but because she understood which questions deserved the trouble of being answered properly. 2 years of knowing that the man whose house she walked into every morning was connected, through corporate decisions and deferred safety reviews and the specific bureaucratic distance that allows people in boardrooms to feel separate from what happens on the ground, to the morning her husband had not come home. And she had come anyway. Every morning. She had come because Oliver needed her to come, and because Oliver needing her was sufficient reason, as it had apparently always been sufficient reason for Francis Okafor, as reason enough, as the whole of the reason, as the thing that made the morning possible when nothing else could. He thought about Catherine's photograph. He thought about 6 or 7 months ago, noticing it had been moved from the hall table to the upstairs landing, and asking Genevieve about the dust and the light on that table, and accepting the answer because he was tired, and acceptance had become his primary mode of operation in this house. He had not noticed when it came back to the table. He had told himself he had simply adjusted, had stopped registering the absence, and therefore stopped registering the return. He had not adjusted. Francis had put it back, and he had absorbed the restoration without examining where it had come from, the way we absorb the small corrections that steady our lives, without ever looking at the hands that make them. He thought about Genevieve. He thought about the specific shape of the last 14 months, about the things that had changed in this house, not dramatically, but incrementally, the way arrangements change when someone is managing them toward a conclusion they have not stated. He thought about the 2 previous attempts he had not known about, but understood must have existed. He thought about a woman who had arrived to help with Oliver, and had stayed to arrange everything, and about the patience required for that kind of arrangement, and about what patience of that kind costs the person on whom it is practiced. Genevieve said his name. He did not look up. Francis had not moved. Oliver was still holding her hand, and she was still at the door, and she was looking at William on the step with an expression that he only understood later, when he had had time to think about it properly, was not pity and was not triumph, and was not the expression of someone waiting to be vindicated. It was the expression of someone watching a person arrive at a truth that was always going to arrive eventually, and feeling, at the sight of it, something closer to grief than anything else. Genevieve said his name again. He looked up at her. He looked at his mother as though he were seeing her from a significant distance, or through some medium that altered the quality of what he was looking at. And what he saw clearly, for what he understood was the first time in 14 months, was a woman who had moved into his house to help him and had stayed to arrange it, who had managed the household and managed the staff and managed his son's care and managed, with the quiet, methodical precision of a person who has identified a goal and pursued it without announcement. The removal of every person in the house, whose presence she found inconvenient. 2 previous attempts to remove Frances, he would learn the details of these later from Mrs. Hewitt, the cook, who had seen both and said nothing, because saying nothing was the tax of working in a house where the wrong person had the most power. 2 previous attempts that had not held, and now a third with a sapphire brooch and a time-stamped photograph and a security log. All of it prepared in advance, all of it constructed with the care of a person who understands that evidence is only convincing when it is presented by someone who appears reluctant to present it. He thought about Catherine's photograph. He thought about noticing, 6 or 7 months ago, that it had been moved from the hall table to the upstairs landing, and asking Genevieve about it. And Genevieve saying something about the dust and the light on that table, and him accepting this because he was very tired, and acceptance was easier than inquiry. He had not noticed when it came back to the table. He had assumed he had simply stopped noticing its absence. He had not stopped noticing. Frances had put it back. He stood up from the step. His legs were steady now. They were steady in the way that legs become steady after a shock has passed through them completely and left behind, in its place, a very specific clarity. Not the clarity of resolution, but the clarity of a man who has finally looked at something squarely and is not going to look away from it. He walked down to the entrance hall. He stood in front of his mother. "The Brook," he said. She looked at him. "Where is it?" It was not a question. He knew the answer, and she knew he knew, and they both understood, in this moment, that what was being decided in this hallway was not about the Brook. Genevieve held his gaze for a long moment. She was 68 years old, and she had been managing people for 68 years, and she was very good at it, and she understood, looking at her son's face, that the tools she had been using did not work on the expression she was currently looking at. She had prepared for grief, for confusion, for the particular malleability of a man too tired to question the reasonable conclusions of a reasonable person. She had not prepared for this. "It's in my room," she said. The words landed in the hallway like something dropped from a height. Mrs. Hewitt appeared in the kitchen doorway. She had been there, William suspected, for some time. Mrs. Hewitt always knew when something significant was happening in the house, possessed as she was of the particular awareness of a person who has cooked 3 meals a day in a house for 9 years and understands its rhythms the way a musician understands a piece they have played 10,000 times. She stood in the kitchen doorway with a dish towel in her hands, and she did not say anything. Patrick, the driver, was near the front door. He had been waiting to take Frances' bag to the car, because that had been the plan Genevieve had given him that morning. He also did not say anything. These were the witnesses. They were not many. They were sufficient. William turned to Frances. "Please stay," he said. "Please don't go." Frances looked at Oliver, who was still holding her hand and had been watching his father with the focused attention of a child who is following a very important story and does not want to miss any part of it. "Oliver," she said, "can you go to the kitchen with Mrs. Hewitt? I'll be there in a few minutes." Oliver considered this. He let go of her hand slowly, the way children let go of things when they have decided to trust that they will still be there later. He went to Mrs. Hewitt, who put an arm around his shoulders and took him into the kitchen and pulled the door too, though not entirely closed, because she also did not want to miss what came next. William addressed Genevieve in a voice that was very quiet and very clear. The way his voice became when he was completely resolved about something, a tone Catherine had called his decision voice, which he had not heard himself use in 14 months. He told her that he wanted her to collect the brooch from her room and bring it to the hall table. He told her that he had a great deal of thinking to do, and that he would like to do it without distraction, and that he thought it would be better for both of them if she spent some time at her own property for the next several weeks. He told her that he was grateful for the care she had brought to his house in the early months, and that he understood she had done what she had done for reasons that she believed were good, and that this understanding did not change what he now needed to do. Genevieve brought the brooch. She set it on the hall table beside Catherine's photograph. She looked at William for a moment with the look of a woman who has several things she would like to say and has decided, with the discipline of 68 years of management, not to say them. Then she went upstairs to pack. Patrick drove her to her apartment that afternoon. William sat in the kitchen with Oliver and Frances and Mrs. Hewitt, and drank tea that Mrs. Hewitt made without being asked, which was one of her greatest skills, and he did not speak for a long time. Oliver sat beside Frances with the settled, returned quality of a child who had temporarily been required to be very brave and has now been given permission to stop. He ate a biscuit. He leaned against Frances's arm. He did not say anything either, because he had said the most important thing already. And he understood this, and he was content to let the silence carry the weight of it. William looked at Frances across the table. He had been composing something since he sat down on the step, not composing it consciously, but the way the mind composes things when it understands that words are required and begins assembling them without instruction. He had been composing an apology, and it was not adequate, and he knew it was not adequate, and he said it anyway, because the alternative was silence, and silence was what he had given for too long to too many things in this house. He told her about Cresthaven. He told her what he knew and what he had failed to ask, and what the difference between those two things had cost, and that he understood the cost now in a way he had not understood it this morning or for the 14 months before it. He was careful not to compress it, not to give her the summary version, the version that moved quickly past the uncomfortable parts to arrive at the conclusion. He gave her the full account, including the parts that reflected badly on him, because she had given him 2 years of the full account of herself without compression or summary, and he owed her the equivalent. He told her he was sorry. He said it once. He did not say it a second time, because she was not a person who needed things said twice, and repeating it would have been for his benefit rather than hers, and he owed her better than that. Frances listened to all of it without looking away, and without filling the pauses with reassurance, because she was not a woman who offered reassurance before it had been earned. She was quiet for a long time after he finished. The kitchen was the particular quiet of a room in which something important has just been said, and the air has not yet settled back around it. His name was Thomas, she said. He was 34. Yes, he was good at his work. He was careful. The sight wasn't. William looked at the table. No, I came here because Oliver needed someone, and I needed work, she said. That's the truth of it. I didn't come to make anything harder for you. I came because it was the job, and Oliver needed the job done, and I thought. She stopped. Not from distress, from the careful consideration of a person choosing the most honest version of a thought. I thought I could keep the two things separate. What happened to Thomas? And the work. I thought I was the kind of person who could do that. I found out I was the kind of person who could do it on most days. Not all of them. The days you couldn't, William said, and then stopped. I'd come in early, she said. Before my shift started, I'd sit in the garden for a few minutes before I came inside. Oliver never knew. He was always still asleep. He looked at her for a moment, at the woman who had sat in his garden at 7 in the morning, alone, gathering whatever she needed to gather to walk through the door. I didn't know, he said. You weren't meant to, she said, not unkindly. Simply as a fact, the same way she stated most things, with the plainness of a person who has learned that plainness is a form of respect. Oliver makes it easier, she said after a moment. He doesn't know that. She looked at the boy beside her, who had finished his biscuit and was listening to the conversation with the full, solemn attention he gave to things he understood were important. He asks questions the way Thomas asks questions, like everything matters enough to understand properly. Oliver looked up at her. I do? You do. He considered this with evident satisfaction and reached for another biscuit. The formal work took weeks. William's legal team contacted the Whitmore Group affiliate, which no longer existed in its original form, but whose parent company did, and the records of the Cresthaven site were obtained through the process that lawyers use when they need records that the holders of those records would prefer not to produce. What the records showed was the thing William had already understood in his hallway: that the review had been conducted but its findings had not been implemented, that the safety modification required had been deferred twice in the interest of schedule, and that Thomas Okafor had died on a Thursday afternoon in circumstances that a properly implemented review would have prevented. The settlement offer went to Francis's solicitor on a Wednesday morning. It was substantial, and it was not contested, and it was not the important part. The important part was what William announced at the Ashford Group's annual contractor review 6 weeks later: a full assembly of every site manager, every project lead, every safety officer affiliated with the company's construction operations across 11 active developments. He stood at the front of the room and he spoke for 12 minutes, which was 8 minutes longer than he had ever spoken at this event before, because he had things to say that required the time they required. He announced the Thomas Okafor Site Safety Protocol. He described what it mandated: a binding, time-limited safety review at every stage of every project, with external verification, with no provision for deferral on grounds of schedule, with a named accountable officer at every site whose sole function was compliance, and who reported not to the project manager but directly to the board. He described what it was named for and why it was named for it, and he said the name clearly, and he did not rush past it, because the name was the most important part of what he was announcing. Frances sat in the third row. She had been told there would be an announcement. She had not been told what form it would take. She looked at the floor when he said Thomas's name, and then she looked up, and the expression on her face was the one that belongs to people who have been carrying something alone for a long time, and have been given, without warning, the experience of watching someone else carry it too, even briefly, even in the formal and insufficient way that public gestures carry things. It was not relief. It was older than relief and more complicated, and it had no name that served it, and it did not need one. Oliver sat beside her. He was wearing the same blue jacket he had worn the morning in the hallway. He held her hand throughout the announcement, not with the desperate grip of that morning, but with the easy, habitual grip of a child who holds a hand, because the hand is there, and it is a hand he trusts, which is a different thing. And the difference is the entire measure of what had changed in those 6 weeks. When William finished speaking, and the room began its response, Frances leaned down to Oliver and said something in his ear, and he nodded, and then he looked at the front of the room where his father was standing. He was not a child who smiled extravagantly. He had never been, even before his mother died, though the reserve had deepened afterward. But something moved across his face at that moment, quiet and private and entirely his own, and Frances saw it. And Mrs. Hewitt, who had come to the event because William had asked her to come, and she had said yes without needing a reason beyond the asking, saw it too. They went home that evening in William's car, all 4 of them, William and Oliver and Frances and Mrs. Hewitt, which was an unusual configuration for this car and for these 4 people, and none of them remarked on it. Because some arrangements simply feel correct, and the correctness requires no commentary. William had left the front door on the latch. When they came in, the entrance hall was warm, and the side table lamp was on, and Catherine's photograph was where Frances had placed it 8 months ago, catching the light the way it always caught the light at this hour, the particular warm angle of an evening lamp on a silver frame. A draft came through the door behind them as William pushed it open, and the photograph moved slightly on the table. Just a degree. Just the small rotation of something light and balanced being touched by air, and then settled back, and was still. Oliver looked at it. Then he looked at his father. Then he went to the kitchen to find something to eat, because he was 8 and it was past dinner time, and some things, regardless of the gravity of everything surrounding them, remain straightforwardly and urgently true. If you have ever stayed somewhere that cost you something, stayed not for yourself, but because someone needed you to stay, and said nothing about the cost, because saying something would have made it someone else's burden, if you have ever been the person in a house who knew everything and asked for nothing and was present in every room and absent from every record, then you know what Francis carried through that front door every morning for 2 years. A child knows who is real in his life, the way water knows where to run. Not by being told, not by being taught, but by the simple and unargued authority of what he has already experienced. In the dark, when no one was watching and nothing was being performed.